And welcome to the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus November meeting. And this month, it's a very special meeting because we've got a town hall with Cuyahoga County Prosecutor candidate Matthew On. My name's Steve Holeko. I'm the political director of the organization. Um, and before we start, just a few little housekeeping chores. One of the things that we found through Zoom meetings is it's best not to put a lot of links in the chat. And the reason is, especially tonight when we have a very informative program, folks are switching back and forth looking at the chat, okay? And then when you do that, you always miss something. So what we're going to do is we're going to send out an email tomorrow to all of you who are here and those of you who registered and maybe something came up and you couldn't make it. And we will have all those links in that email. The links will include an invitation to join the Progressive Caucus if you're not already a member. And, there may be some people interested in Matthew's campaign who aren't members. A donate link. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed, and we depend on small contributions from people like you to keep our office open and to send out our emails. There will also be a video of this event. We record all of our events on our YouTube channel. And we actually get more people who watch the recorded than who actually show up. So, that's for the folks who registered but couldn't make it. And maybe a little ask, if you like what you hear and you want to share it on your Facebook page and other social media, that would be great. Take a look at this is a nice headline. And from the Matthew On campaign, we will have several links. One is public records requests. One is, and I'm looking around, probably some of you are already getting this, but if not, get updates from the campaign, volunteer for the campaign, donate to the campaign, and this is a really cool event coming up on December 8th, and that is Matthew's fundraiser, and it's going to be at a really cool place, the Negative Space Gallery in Asian Town Center. Asia Town is a really cool location, and that's a really cool gallery. And then there's a few upcoming CCPC events that we want to plug as well. One is our friends from Better Cleveland for All, which is a PAC that focuses on Cleveland issues and Cleveland candidates, but it's run by CCPC members. They are having their fundraiser the day before Matthews on December 7th at the Forest City Brewery. If you could make that, that would be great, or give a donation. That would be also great. And we have a save the date. Our expert graphics people, of which Deb Klein is one of them, are in the process of making a really cool, spiffy Facebook event for our 8th anniversary celebration. And I know some of you were at the 7th anniversary celebration last year. It's going to be at the same location, the Ohio City Inn in Lakewood, which is like a block away from our office. Before we begin, a very, very special thank you to all that you guys did to make November 7th a very special day. A clean sweep on all of the issues and almost all of the candidates that we wanted to get elected in Cuyahoga County. Now, we've got a few weeks in the holidays, except for going to Matthew's fundraiser, and there's other events that, help him get signatures, except for that, to kind of rest up. But next year, all we have to do is get a gerrymandering constitutional amendment passed, anti-gerrymandering, I'm sorry, $15 minimum wage constitutional amendment passed, and most likely in November via the ballot box prevent fascist dictatorship from emerging in our country. So, uh, other than that, it should be a light year. But one of our biggest tasks is to get a progressive elected to Cuyahoga County prosecutor. And the big date for that election isn't in November, it's in the March primary, because the Democrat who wins that primary is virtually certain to win the general election. So, in March, we will be focusing on Matthew's campaign. And before I introduce Matthew, just want to let you guys know. Um, I kind of forgot his name, but the other candidate in the race, the current prosecutor, he was invited to a forum with Matthew and he declined to attend. So without further ado, please welcome Cuyahoga County Progressive candidate for county prosecutor, Matthew On. We can do this.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I am glad to be back here. It's been a few months since I presented on critical race theory to this group, and I'm glad to be back here as a candidate for Cuyahoga County prosecutor. My name is Matthew On. I'm a law professor at Cleveland State, native of North Royalton, a former public defender, former special education lawyer, former affiliate group outreach director for the County Democratic Party, former Guinness World Record holder, former Jeopardy contestant, huge nerd, basically, is really what it boils down to. And this nerd is running for Cuyahoga County prosecutor because I believe that we can create justice for all in Cuyahoga County. And everything that I've experienced has helps me to understand how we define justice for all. As I said, I grew up in North Royalton, in a union household, in a union neighborhood. And the strength of our community was justice. After graduating from Case Western, I taught at Tri-C, helping low-income and first-generation students complete their essential math and science requirements for their associate's degrees. Their educational security was justice. I worked as a special education attorney after law school, representing parents whose children were being denied accommodations by their school districts. Those children's opportunity for success was justice. And for most of my law practice career, I was a public defender, handling mostly sentencing, appeals, and post-conviction work. I fought for services that my incarcerated clients desperately needed while they were in prison. And for folks who were ready to return home, I was able to fight for their release, their rehabilitation, and their success upon reentry was justice. Now, all of this leads me to believe in a fundamental truth, which is that we create justice for all when we think big about what our communities need. Now, as a law professor at Cleveland State, I've had an opportunity to drill down into the practices of our current county prosecutor. There are people doing good and difficult work in that office, but they're being directed to carry out policies that fall short of justice for all. Let me give you 4 examples. So first, over the last 5 years, the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office has tried nearly as many children as adults as the rest of Ohio combined. We know that children tried as adults and sent to adult prison are not put in a position to rehabilitate, but instead become more likely to commit further crimes and making us all less safe. 92% of the children that have been tried as adults in this county are Black. Second, over that same 5-year span, Cuyahoga County has issued more death sentences than any other county in the United States. Not just Ohio, the entire country. We know that the death penalty does not reduce the murder rate, is prone to error, is prone to bias, and is actually more expensive than sentencing somebody to life in prison. Now, third, Cuyahoga County leads the state of Ohio by a wide margin in confirmed wrongful convictions. And yet, despite this history, our county prosecutor's office, when somebody finds new evidence of their innocence and is let out of prison by the courts after 20 or 30 or even 45 years, The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, in most cases in the last several years, has said, you're going back to trial on your original decades-old charges. It's a waste of public resources. It's a waste of everybody's time. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, finally, our county government is talking about building a $2.2 billion jail in Garfield Heights, a proposal that is only so expensive because we're still using an outdated cash bail system to determine who stays in jail and who is released during the pendency of their case. If we base our decisions about pretrial detention on public safety instead of who can afford to pay their way out, we will not only be safer, but we will actually save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, which we can reinvest into proven crime prevention strategies in our communities. All of these things together demonstrate to me that we have a crisis of leadership at the top of our prosecutor's office. We have an elected official who rejects the evidence and the research that it shows us how to make our communities safer. An elected official who uses the media to pit our law enforcement officers against our judges. An elected official who blames anybody but himself for the rise in crime that we've seen under his watch. This is not the behavior of a strong leader who understands what our communities need. Instead, as your prosecutor, I will target the crimes that harm our community, build an office in the people's interest, work to break the cycle of trauma, and support rehabilitation through services. That is justice for all. It's what our communities need, it's what our community has been asking for, and it's what our community deserves. So I hope that on March 19th, that you will consider me, Matthew Ahn, again, that's spelled A-H-N, for county prosecutor. And I know that I've just thrown a lot of information at you. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I am looking forward to having a dialogue here and answering as many of those questions as I can.
Speaking of questions, Deb Klein, our tech person, and Deb, do you want to explain the muting and how we're going to do the questions after? We're going to do the questions that you guys submitted ahead of time first, and then if there's follow-up questions to the answers Matthew gives, we'll go to those afterwards, or maybe you might have some additional questions. Deb?
Yep. Okay, everyone, you can put your questions in the chat, and then I will read those for Matthew to answer, or you can raise your hand, not by doing this. Go down to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, hit the up arrow, and you'll see the option to raise your hand, because that will put you up in the queue. And we ask people to, or I let people answer their questions in the order that they go up in the queue. So remember, put your questions in the chat or raise your hand.
And as usual, the questions you guys submitted were brilliant and well-informed. And as we go through the questions, if it's not the exact wording you submitted, we oftentimes get similar questions and we have to combine them to get a different wording. And these are topically. And the first topic, Matthew sort of touched upon in his introduction, deals with the new jail proposal. And the question is, the county is currently planning to build a new jail estimated to hold about 2,000 people. Do you believe Cuyahoga County needs a new jail?
So I certainly believe that Cuyahoga County does not need a jail that is built to hold 2,000 people. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the jail population was reduced to about 950 folks. Right now, the current jail population fluctuates between about 1,600 and 1,700. It's part of the reason why the state is saying that Cuyahoga County needs to build a new jail with a capacity of about 2,000. I simply don't think that is what the county needs. And I believe that if we build this large jail, there will be some incentives, and some pressure to fill the new jail fully. And I simply don't think it's necessary for Cuyahoga County.
Okay, this is kind of a follow-up question. If the jail were to be built, where do you think it should be?
That's a great question. And I have heard at least some reports from some of the consultant work products that has been produced over the last several years that the current jail structure may be beyond saving. I haven't looked at it myself. But if we do need to build a new jail, I believe that jail needs to be downtown. It needs to be directly, physically connected to the courts. This is for a number of different reasons. Accessibility to families and to visitors is a big one. Just logistical problems. For example, New York City has a jail population approximately 3 times the jail population of Cuyahoga County, which, first of all, should tell us something because New York City's population is about 7 times that of Cuyahoga County. But their transportation fleet, just for transporting people who are in jail to their court dates, is over 400 vehicles, right? This is a logistical cost that we will need to pay if the jail complex is separated from the courts complex. And so I believe that the courthouse and the jails should remain together. I believe the place to do that is downtown. And that also avoids all sorts of other logistical problems that would pop up. Separate, sort of even from the idea of how large the jail needs to be and what is even necessary for Cuyahoga County.
You mentioned how large the jail should be. What do you think its maximum capacity of inmates should be?
That's a great question. I do know that there were a number of sort of extraordinary measures that were taken to get the jail population down to 950. As I said, the current population tends to fluctuate between 1,600 and 1,700. I believe that transitioning from a cash bail system to one that is based on public safety, we can probably close a substantial portion of that gap pretty quickly. I don't want to make any specific promises. Again, I don't know exactly who is in the jail right now, partially because some of this data is not readily available to the public. But I believe that 1,600 is a greater jail population than necessary, especially given that it is close to double what the jail population was in 2020.
The Cuyahoga County Jail has had several deaths in the past years. What is your plan to make sure the jail is safe for both workers and inmates?
And that's a great question. This is an issue of safety, as you said, for both inmates and for folks who work in the jail. Now, I do want to note that the prosecutor's office does not directly oversee jail operations. That is handled by the sheriff's office. But I do believe that a big part of the issue is appropriate staffing levels. I've talked with corrections officers who believe that if a reduction in the jail population were to occur, they would have a lot easier of a time dealing with some of these systemic issues that we're seeing that are influencing the safety of them and the inmates. So, this is something where the prosecutor's office can have an influence on the level of the population. I believe that as long as we are not holding folks in the jail who do not have to be there, that makes issues of safety a lot easier to deal with.
Okay, the next topic is cash bail, Matthew, and you touched on a lot of this, but maybe with the questions you can elaborate a little bit more. The first one is your position on cash bail. And just to maybe elaborate on that question, in your mind, what would be the ideal cash bail policy?
So cash bail as a whole, I believe it is outdated and does not work. The idea behind cash bail is sort of premised on this idea of what people can afford, which generally has very little to do with public safety. And so right now, what we see is that there are people who are currently in our county jail because they cannot afford a cash bail amount that was set at under $1,000. But that bail amount automatically, it tells us that that person is not in jail because they are accused of some very serious crime, right? If they're having their bail amount set at several $100s, they're probably in jail because they are being accused of a relatively low-level crime. Meanwhile, we see individuals who commit relatively serious crimes that are given a very high cash bail amount, but if they're wealthy, they can afford to pay their way out of jail. That is not a system that makes any sense. The sort of most evidence-based and research-based policy that we can have regarding pretrial detention is to base that decision on public safety. Right? Either you are a threat to the community and you need to remain in the jail, or you're not, and you should be able to be released with whatever conditions the judge deems necessary to make sure you show back up in court and to make sure that the community is being protected. This is the way that pretrial detention, for example, works in federal court. There are laws at the state level that also allow for this kind of system. So it's just a matter of making sure that that's what the prosecutor is asking for, rather than a cash bail amount.
Thank you. Next section deals with bindovers, juvenile crime, and juvenile justice. And the first one is, what is your plan to decrease the number of bindovers in Cuyahoga County?
Right. And just to give some background, just in case anybody is unfamiliar with the term bindover. Right? The bindover is the practice of transferring a child who is charged with a crime into adult court. When a child is bound over from juvenile court into adult court, they are tried as an adult, and if they are convicted, they are sentenced to an adult prison sentence. So under state law in Ohio, there are two different kinds of bindovers. A mandatory bindover based on the charges that is required under state law. The prosecutor and the judges don't really have any discretion once those charges are filed. That child has to move over into adult court. But there is a substantial number of bindovers that are happening in Cuyahoga County that are what are called discretionary bindovers. These are children that don't have to move over into adult court, and the prosecutor specifically asks a judge to move this child over into adult court. Several experts have called on the prosecutor's office to pause discretionary bindovers while we try to figure out how to make the system fairer. As I said in my opening remarks, currently Cuyahoga County tries almost as many children as adults as the rest of the state combined, and 92% of those children are Black. I would go ahead and implement that recommended pause on discretionary bindovers so that children who do not have to move over to adult court can stay in juvenile court, and we can treat children like children. In addition, I'm going to get a little bit more into the weeds here, I apologize, but the prosecutor, even in cases of mandatory bindovers, has some power and discretion because the prosecutor's office gets to choose what the charges are in any individual case. And so many of these cases where we are seeing quote unquote mandatory bindovers, these are cases that may be being overcharged in the first place, right? It is possible that some of these children may not actually merit charges that require them to be moved over into adult court. And that is a case-by-case determination that I, as your elected prosecutor, can help to make to ensure that we are not moving more children into adult court than is absolutely necessary.
Okay, you actually answered the next bind over question already. So we'll move on. Um, community violence. What can the prosecutor do to make our neighborhoods safer?
That's a great question. And this is one of the sort of fundamental shared goals and shared needs of everybody in our community. We want to make sure that our neighborhoods are safe, that we are safe, and that we feel safe. And the prosecutor has the most influence over that by expanding the scope of their vision, right? We want the prosecutor to not just react to crime, but to also think about preventing it. And there are two different places where we can do that, on the front end and at the back end. So on the front end, the prosecutor's office should be encouraging proven violence prevention strategies. The most effective violence prevention strategies, as sort of borne out by the research, are early childhood education and after-school weekend and summer programming for children ages 6 to 12. These are the kinds of programs that are often missing in our poorest and most disinvested neighborhoods. And these are the sorts of things that a strong leader can bring stakeholders together to encourage, to direct funding, to write grants, and to do and to really sort of support our communities on the front end. At the same time, the prosecutor's office does have a lot of power on the back end to also make sure that we are trying to prevent crime. The prosecutor's office should be crafting sentence requests in a way that promotes rehabilitation, because rehabilitation itself is crime prevention because it minimizes the number of repeat offenders. This not only applies to sentencing, but also includes encouraging reentry programs so that folks who return from jail and prison have the supports to make sure that they do not return to crime for any particular reason, right? That we are providing the supports to make sure that they can function well in the society that they are returning to. This is the big picture thinking that will help us to make our neighborhood safer.
We've heard the term decarceration. So let's phrase this question in that context. In what ways does mass incarceration make our community less safe?
It's a great question. There are two different things that I think are at play here, right? First, if we look at the perspective of the person who is being incarcerated, lengthy sentences for less serious crimes or lengthy jail stays for cases that are overcharged, these are things that destabilize a person's life and leave them far less equipped to build a productive life after their incarceration. This includes, right, lengthy prison sentences for nonviolent crimes, for example. Right? Society is changing at a much quicker rate today than it has ever in the past. And folks oftentimes have a lot of trouble adjusting after a lengthy prison sentence and are currently not being provided with sufficient supports to make that adjustment. And at the same time, when we're talking about shorter jail stays, there is pretty good research and evidence out there to show that somebody who does not have a lengthy criminal record, who is incarcerated in a jail for only 4 days, their risk of recidivism goes up as much as 50%, because that leaves them at risk of losing their job, losing their housing, losing custody of family members, and other issues that are going to make their lives less stable. In addition, from the perspective of the community, mass incarceration takes folks out of their community, right? Especially when we're issuing lengthy sentences for less serious nonviolent crimes. This perpetuates a cycle of trauma and poverty that becomes very difficult for an entire community to overcome and to escape from. These are the sorts of long-range issues that lead to individuals who do not see a future for themselves, right? One of the clinical sort of symptoms of long-term low-grade trauma is an inability to be able to visualize your future, right? And this is what we're seeing in a lot of our poorest communities. And taking folks out of those communities for crimes that are less serious, that are non-violent, is going to make that cycle worse. These are the sorts of things that a prosecutor's office should be thinking about, should understand, and should be trying to avoid.
The next category is miscellaneous. Do you think people who are in jail for marijuana use should be released, especially since issue 2 just passed?
Absolutely. Short answer is yes. My longer answer is that much of this is not under the purview of the county prosecutor's office, and this is an important distinction. The county prosecutor's office on the criminal side charges crimes that are felonies. And so that is any crime in Ohio that carries a maximum sentence of longer than 6 months. Misdemeanors, which are all of the other crimes, generally get charged at the city level in municipal courts. And so a lot of these charges for things like marijuana possession are happening at the city level. That being said, right, any criminalization of things like addiction, which we understand as a medical issue, right? It's not just counterproductive because it takes folks out of the community, it subjects folks to incarceration unnecessarily. It's also cruel. We should not be doing it. And certainly with the passage of issue 2, which I support, I believe that that we should be really aiming to get folks out of jail and prison for these things that now are legal, and making sure that they don't have any long-term consequences, right? That they can have their record expunged, and that they have all of the tools to be the most productive members of society that they can be.
Okay, what is the policy or idea that you are excited to implement in the prosecutor's office that you are not asked about?
I would say one of the big things that I've run into certainly in my research over the last few years, and something that I think will really reshape how we in the county think about criminal justice, is the question of data transparency. One of the reasons that I spend so much time speaking about the racial disparities in regards to children tried as adults is because it's one of the only things where we actually have data about what the office is doing in terms of racial disparities. It's data that's compiled by the state. In a lot of these other areas, things like sentencing, right, we actually do not currently have access to that data. The prosecutor represents the people of Cuyahoga County. And so in short, our lawyer isn't telling us how he's doing, right? Are there currently racial disparities in sentencing? Are there racial disparities in questions of pretrial detention? Are there racial disparities in terms of hiring and promotions within the office? Right? We are his clients, and we deserve to know. Right? I've submitted, there have been numerous records requests in the past, whether by journalists, whether it's by academics, whether it's by just regular citizens who that have just gone unanswered. And this is the kind of thing that lets, I think, a lot of the outcomes that we suspect are happening fly under the radar. This is one of the reasons why I believe a lot of attention has not yet been paid to how the prosecutor's office is operating. I've talked to other prosecutors across the country about what their data transparency practices look like. I think there are a lot of different ways to get that information out there for us all to understand, right, what the state of criminal justice is in Cuyahoga County. And without that data and without that transparency, it's difficult to know how to move forward and how, for us as citizens, we can best advocate for the system to be improved, right? This is one of those things that I believe, right, with some change in the prosecutor's office, we can really encourage sort of another wave and another round of reforms past what we already know needs to be improved.
Okay, the last of our questions submitted ahead of time. What is something that has surprised you or that you have learned during campaigning so far?
Well, I would say that I came into this process expecting to have to do a lot of education on criminal justice policy, right? We've only had 2 meaningfully contested county prosecutor elections in the last 70 years. And as a result, a lot of these sort of oftentimes very complicated policy questions have flown under the radar. And so I was prepared to sort of have very lengthy conversations about the ways in which criminal justice policy was not serving justice for all, but all across the county, from Bay Village to Brecksville, from Cleveland Ward 1 to Solon to Fairview Park. I have talked to folks who really already have an appetite to improve the criminal justice system, to really, embrace a different approach than the one that we've seen in the last 6.5, 7 years. And honestly, it's really been very heartening to talk to so many folks who are excited for what is to come in Cuyahoga County. That I think has been the best thing that I've really learned on the campaign trail so far.
Okay, that's it for the questions submitted ahead of time. I noticed that a couple of folks just hopped on. We will be sending out a video of the event tomorrow to you guys, so you can catch, the first part of the event that you might have missed. Deb, you're up. Questions from the audience.
Yes, our first question is from Eric Deemer. Go ahead, Eric.
Can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
Sorry. I just had a question just about the implementation of, ending cash bail. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. I'm sorry. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I think he stopped because his audio was breaking up. Does anybody else have any questions? You want to put it in the chat? Do you want to raise your hand? Eric, do you want to put yours in the chat? Okay, so we have a question from Sean Freeman.
Hi, thank you for putting this on CCPC, and thank you, Matt. It's been incredible to learn more information. I was curious if there are any private prisons in your jurisdiction if you do become the prosecutor, and what, if anything, you could do to tackle private prisons or their practices.
That's a great question. So there are a handful of private prisons in Ohio. Those are run and administered by ODRC, the state agency. And so I would not, as prosecutor, have direct sort of oversight of private prisons or the decision to send folks to private prisons. That being said, the prosecutor of the second largest county in Ohio does have a lot of sort of power at the bully pulpit, right? This is an issue where I would be happy to lead to say, private prisons are not, right, a healthy part of the criminal justice system. We should not be using them, and we should be turning away from them as much as possible. That's certainly something in my experience in law practice that I've seen, my clients who have been housed in private prisons have had, particular issues in the conditions of their confinement or in being able to to advocate for themselves in one way or another. And that's certainly something that I could make and would make a priority as an elected prosecutor, is to really lean on other stakeholders at the state level and at other levels.
Steve, I got Eric's question, so he's first, and then I'll come back to you. Eric's question was just wondering if ending cash bail could be done simply by changing prosecutor's office policies, or if there would need to be a referendum or city council legislation.
That's a great question, and it's there are some of the things that I've mentioned. Literally on day one, I could implement a new policy and they would not happen anymore. Things like the death penalty, things like discretionary bindovers. Cash bail is a little bit trickier because the judge could choose to implement cash bail in any given case, even if the prosecutor's office does not ask for it. And so it would take, I think, a little bit of time, a little bit of leadership over time in order to really move away from cash bail entirely. But I know that the courts have had some success with some judges, and I believe that if the initial request were not for cash bail, that would help us continue to move in that direction. This is something that I see as maybe taking a little bit more time, right? It's not something that can happen immediately on day one. The judge would still be allowed to order a cash bail amount, but I believe that there are ways that the prosecutor's office could encourage judges to move away from cash bail, even in addition to never requesting it, which I intend to do.
Okay, Steve, you're up.
So, Matt, I once heard a phrasing that goes like this: there's a lot of innocent people in jail. And what it means is that you're innocent until proven guilty. So if you're in jail waiting trial, you're innocent. How many people currently in the Cuyahoga County Jail would you estimate are innocent because they haven't been proven guilty?
The vast majority of folks who are currently in the Cuyahoga County Jail are there because they have a case pending and have not been convicted. There is a small portion of the population who are serving sort of what they call a local incarceration sentence, a sentence of incarceration of maybe just a couple of months. But the vast majority of folks who are being held in our county jail are folks who are there because they have not yet been convicted. I've heard a couple of different numbers, so I don't want to, pick an inaccurate number. But the vast majority of the folks who are currently in our county jail are there because their case is still pending and they have not been convicted.
So we don't have a question, but we have a comment from Mike Rogalski, who says, "I'm excited for you, Matthew, and I'm excited for progress in our county."
I really appreciate that. I'm also excited for progress in our county, and I think we're going to hopefully see some on March 19th.
Anyone else have a question? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. No other questions, Steve?
So I'm just looking at the audience, and I see a number of you are Cuyahoga County Democratic Party executive committee members. And the endorsement vote for the county prosecutor race is coming up soon. My understanding, I spoke with Dave Brock a few days ago, is that it's likely to be moved to January 6th. But if you're supporting Matthew, please, and you are an executive committee member, please make sure you get to that meeting, because every vote is important. Matthew, do you have any closing words you'd like to say?
I feel like we've had a really substantive discussion about policy, and I really appreciate that. The reason I got into this race was because I believed that we could really improve policy. I would just say that you're probably between now and March 19th going to hear some things from potentially an opponent of mine that have very little to do with criminal justice policy and how we can improve the criminal justice system and make our communities safer. And I hope that you will be able to cut through that noise, think about what we've talked about here, and really focus on that, not only sort of in this setting, but also in conversations that you may have with folks, potentially conversations that you may have in a volunteer capacity for the campaign. I look forward to speaking with all of you more, and please reach out with any questions. I believe my contact is going to be included in the links that are sent out.
Okay, wait, we just got another question. Do you have a number of people who you could enlist as, sorry, I turned it, do you have a number of people who could enlist as county employees to carry out this new approach? And that's from Ann Caruso. Excellent.
Well, as the elected prosecutor is the head of the prosecutor's office, and so is certainly in charge of personnel within the office. I think one of the things that a strong leader does is to attract the best talent possible and to develop that talent and to ensure that it stays within the office. Currently, turnover within the prosecutor's office is at a historic high. There are folks who, for any number of reasons, are leaving the office, and it is leading to instability and I think a lesser quality of advocacy on behalf of the citizens of Cuyahoga County. And I definitely believe that part of the job is recruitment and retention, and that is something that I intend to spend the 10-month transition period in between the primary and taking office really making a priority.
And we have another comment from Gail Larson. Keep up the great campaign, Matthew. You have great policies to bring to our county prosecutor's office.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you.
Anyone else? Steve, I think that's it.
Okay, just before we say goodnight, a final plug for Matthew's fundraiser on December 8th at the Negative Space Gallery at Asian Town Center. Please try to make it. We will send you information for that. If that day is not good for you, please click the donate link for that event. And then next month, January 26th, our CCPC 8th anniversary fundraiser. And very soon we will be getting details out about that. Thank you all very much for attending. And if we don't see you soon, happy holidays. Good night.